Hello. Well, today I'm speaking with Tricia Robertson. Welcome, Tricia.
Thank you.
Now, Tricia is one of the biggest psychical researchers with qualifications as long as your arm that you're ever likely to meet. And you've got a massive background in education as well, haven't you, Trish?
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, well, if you'd asked me 35 years ago if I'd be here talking about this, I would have said, don't talk such absolute rubbish. I wasn't, I didn't knowingly know that I was interested in this until things in life changed. And as you know, there's no such thing as coincidence. I now believe that the universe has a plan for us all. And obviously, somebody grabbed me and insisted that I was actually going to do this. So, how it started was I was a teacher of mathematics and science and just an ordinary school teacher, doing that for years and years. And then in 1987, the way it worked, I met Professor Archie Roy, not having heard of him or knowing who he was or anything like that. And the minute Archie Roy and I met, we just were of one mind. Now, Professor Archie Roy was a professor of astronomy at Glasgow University, and he was very well known in astronomical society. Archie was a generation older than me, but the two of us got on extremely well. And I did go out on spontaneous cases with someone else beforehand, but then Archie and I would go, and so did he. He went with the chaplain from Glasgow University in cases. But when we got together, we would often go in cases together. I would drive, Archie didn't drive, and so it began. And then we gave lectures at Glasgow University on introduction to psychical research, and then a further course in psychical research. Now, I should explain for anyone listening who's saying, what on earth is psychical research? Psychical research is non-religious, and it's a way of looking at survival of consciousness. You want to call an afterlife in as scientific a manner as possible. Now, you're never going to do anything in this line 100% scientific. It's just not going to happen. But you can do it in as scientific a manner as possible by using known techniques and even not known techniques, and even gathering masses of information and testimonies. You can formulate them together to make a credible case for one thing or another. But
Yeah.
you're never ever going to convince anyone who does not want to listen, and you should not even bother trying. So anyway, as I say, I met Archie, and Archie and I went on cases. We had experiences and all of that, individual and together. And we gave these 40 hours of lectures at Glasgow University for about 6, 7, or 8 years, I can't remember. And everybody that came to our classes absolutely loved them.
Yeah.
And of course,
Well,
the more you go into these things, the more you realize there is to know.
yeah.
Now, quite recently and over the past few years, people have introduced me as, and here is Tricia Robertson, an expert on survival. Well, of course, the first thing I do is to say, first of all, yes, I am Tricia Robertson, but there are no experts on survival. I can only give you the benefit of any experiences that I've had, and you can make up your own mind on the evidence I can present and on your own experiences. Nothing beats personal experience,
Yeah.
but not everybody has those experiences. And then we have, of course, unfortunately, I'm sort of piggy in the middle. I'm not your hard blown scientist, and I'm not a spiritualist. I'm in the middle trying to look at evidence for both sides. So I can get it from both sides, as it were. But fortunately, we'll come to experiments later on, and Archie and I have 3 published papers in a scientific journal. So that helps. We have walked the walk, we have talked the talk, and both of us are convinced that survival is a thing. I would rather call it survival of consciousness
Yeah.
rather than spirit. You can talk it spirit, you can talk soul, you can talk what the real you is. It doesn't matter. It's all the same thing. We are all one in that consciousness pool, and that consciousness individually and collectively survives. There is no question of that. And I presume you find the same.
I was disappointed to find out spiritualism was a religion, actually, when I got into it.
It it is.
I
It
thought,
is.
1848, it could have gone one of two ways. It went down the religious route, but it could quite easily have gone down the route of the science of survival.
But you see, I'm not a great, I am not personally, this is my opinion, I'm not personally a great fan of the Fox sisters.
No,
These things were happening eons before the Fox sisters came along.
yeah,
And it just so happened, for whatever reason, that they got the advertising, they got the space for this to be carried on. And I suppose in one way it was a good thing. And I believe
well,
the American Society for Psychical Research was a very good thing in those days as well. I think it's gone haywire now, but that's a different matter. Excuse
yeah.
me.
Well, I was thinking about that exact same point just before I brought my laptop downstairs. I was thinking in Psychic News last month, there was a great article by John West on a ghost story in Britain in the 1700s. And
Yeah,
a lady had done such detailed notes on every aspect of the phenomena. It was exactly the same phenomena as Hydesville.
absolutely.
But there was only one difference.
Hmm.
The girl, one of the Fox sisters, I don't know
Mm-hmm.
which one, said, "Okay, Mr. Splitfoot, do as I do." And
Mm.
that was the difference. Because
Mm.
is it Wesley's or Wellesley's of Methodism?
Wesley,
Wesley. They had the same thing as well in the
of
1700s.
course. Yeah, of course.
But they,
You go right back to the Delphi Chronicle. I mean, you're
yeah,
going way, way, way back. But the point is, the Fox sisters did bring it to attention of
yeah,
people. And I
yeah,
don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing. And I do think that they had genuine phenomena, but I think they also were at it as well.
yeah,
A bit like the girls in the Enfield poltergeist case, that was absolutely genuine. And the girls would try to fool Morris Gross and by hiding things, saying, "Oh, Mr. Gross, what's under the tape recorder?" And he would, right away they're at it. That was them, but most of the phenomena was absolutely genuine. Excuse me. The other thing I will say about psychical research, it's we just don't mediumship and spiritualism really looks at mediumship and what mediums can tell you about the other side and receiving information. Psychical research is much wider than that.
yeah,
And therein lies another problem. There's nothing but problems in this whole thing, by the way. You know that yourself. Nothing is cut and dried because we come down like artistry or music. It depends on how good you are in any particular art form. And let's face it, good mediumship is an art form. They have something that nobody else has. And nobody can explain why they have that and other people don't. Just some people do. Some
yeah,
people are good artists, some people are good musicians, and we don't know why.
yeah,
So the topics in psychical research that is looking at all of this. Once you look at all of these topics, well, you've got, for example, you've got mediumship, you've got poltergeist cases, which are not all to do with spirit, but you've got poltergeist cases, you've got near death experiences, out of body, you've got reincarnation, you've got overshadowing cases, possession cases. And once you look at these things and put them all together, it makes the case much stronger for survival of consciousness.
yeah,
Because the question you have to ask in all of these things to the skeptics, and we have done it many times, Archie and I, the question you have to ask is, this is a fact, this is what happened. The strength of the evidence is such that you cannot deny this happened. How else would you explain this? And they can't. They just say, "Oh well," and then they bring up a weak case, which there are weak cases, and then they tar the whole thing with the one brush. Susan Blackmore's terrible for that, Richard Wiseman, and many others. But the thing is to ignore that because they are blindsided, absolutely blindsided. And it's such a shame because once I got into this properly and I realized the good that it did for people who have lost someone, because you never lose someone.
no,
In fact, sometimes when they pass are closer to you than they were when you were here, because you've got 24 hours 7 access in your mind to them. They might not come 24/7, and we don't want them to do that anyway, but because time is different, consciousness is different. It's completely different. Now, I'm not going to use the word quantum because people use it and they don't know what they're talking about. I don't know what it means. I just know it's all entangled and things can happen in an instant. You send out a thought, the thought is there, and the thought has replied in some way or another. But it becomes extremely, what's the word, difficult when you have to take each case on its merit and work with it. And people will say, quite often, if someone dies, they'll come through a medium to someone, might be someone that you know or a stranger, and they'll give information to be provided to the person that's grieving. And people will say, well, why did they not come to me? Well, you know the answer to that. The answer to that is because you're too sad. You're putting a barrier up to receive the message, and that's really very sad, very, very sad. And hopefully, eventually, they get to the point where they can, in fact, get that message. Um, I mean, I've had Archie Roy many times since he passed. In fact, I had him back 3 days after he died, long before he was buried, and it was such an evidential message. And it was in a very small church you'll never have heard of, and there was about 25 to 30 people in the room. Archie died, I think it was the 30th, it was a Thursday that he died. And I mean, I wasn't sad that he died because the year before he had dementia and he didn't know who anybody was. I kept visiting him, but he didn't even know who I was,
Didn't.
which is interesting.
Yeah,
You'll like this bit. You
yeah.
will like
I
this
know what's
because
coming.
you know what's coming. Do
Yeah.
you? Do
His
you?
mind was totally cogent when he next made contact, no doubt.
Apart from that, yes, apart from that, remember it was about a year and Archie's wife kept him in his own house, and she didn't like psychical research. She hated it. So none of us were actually allowed to go and see him. Uh, but he was in a hospital not too far from me, I discovered, and I was able to go and visit him twice a week in the hospital, even though he didn't know who I was. And he was as deaf as a post. So I used to have to bring my chair right up beside him, as close as I am to you. I would show him things and bring a lecture thing or part of his notes or something, and he would say, "Oh, is this something I should be looking at?" So we had this bizarre thing going on for I don't know months. He didn't know who I was, but he got to know me as the woman that came in to see him. You see,
Yeah.
and what the nurses told me was that every morning, this is before he was really ill, the nurses, he had a lovely big room. It wasn't private or anything. It was a lovely big room. And in the morning, the nurses would go in and get him up, and he would line them up along the wall, and he would give them a lecture on psychical research, which I thought was lovely. And obviously, Archie was such a
Wonderful. Yeah.
lovely man, and the nurses obviously very much warmed to him. But this was just an ordinary hospital. And I said to the nurses after the first time, I said, "Do you realize who this person is? This is Professor Archie Roy from Glasgow University." "Oh, yes, we know that." I said, "Well, if you want to know his credentials and credibility, look him up on the internet, and I wanted him to be treated with respect." So the next time we went in, he was near the nurse's station. I went in and I said, "Well, did you look him up?" She said, "Oh, yes, and we saw you too." So that was me. That was me nobbled as well. But that's not the point I was trying to make. I do ramble. I go on.
No
And
problem.
so he had died and all of that. Now, this wasn't what I'm going to tell you now was not the first message. This is the second message. The first message was different. The second message was in Glasgow Association. I had gone along. It was Jackie McLeisham. Now this is long before Jackie was as good as she is now. This is 10 years ago, just over 10 years ago. Jackie was starting out. Now, she was good, but not as good as she is now. And I was sitting near the front, and she knew me, but she didn't know me, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And of course, the way that Archie died, being out of the public gaze, nobody really knew when he died, sort of thing. And that was why the first one was so evidential when somebody gave it 3 days after he died, because the medium wouldn't know. So anyway, Jackie McLeish, it was a few months later, and Jackie McLeish came to me and she said, Tricia, I've got a very tall man. He's like a doctor, she said, and Archie swept his hair over, he'd comb over here. She said he'd the hair combed over, big glasses, etc., etc. And he said, he's only got a very short message for you. She said, this gentleman had a, she said, either Alzheimer or dementia. He lost his memory before he passed. But he wants to tell you that although he didn't appear to know who you were, part of him really did. And that's where that difference comes. And I thought, wow, that doesn't mean a lot to a lot of people. But
Yeah.
that was just so, that was the message, the second one. The first one was in front of 30 odd people. And I'm not going to start telling it because I'll cry and we don't want people crying. But it was so evidential. It was about the big tall man again with the swept over and the glasses. And she said, I don't understand. All he's showing me is stars and moons and rainbows
Wow.
and galaxies.
He
Of
was an
course,
astronomer.
that
Yeah.
yeah. And she went on, but I'm not going into it because I start to cry. It was just so evidential.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's no way that person would know that. She was just a wee Glasgow
Yeah.
woman, and
Yeah.
there's no way that she would ever know that. And of course, the chairperson knew, and people were bringing me hankies and cups of water. how to be credible.
So
Anyway, that was only part of it, and that was amazing. That was
you,
amazing.
you were both in the Scottish Society of
Well,
Psychical Research then, right?
Archie founded it.
Did he? Oh,
Yeah, yeah. Archie and I went out in cases before we founded it. So Archie founded in 1987,
right.
and I was on the first committee as well. So I've been there since 1987, and it went from strength to strength. I was the one that I'm going to take this off. It's warm in here, and because we did all these other things and gave lectures at conferences and things, we knew lots of people, and we brought up excellent lecturers from all over the world, really, to Glasgow Uni to lecture. It was an excellent situation. It's not quite as good now, but it is still going, and the person's doing their very best to
Yeah.
keep it going. Yeah.
And there's also Prism, isn't there? The
Prism,
psychic.
Prism Archie and I started with Vi Kipling. You know Vi Kipling?
Oh, yeah. Shall I
Yeah.
say what it means? Is the
So,
psychical research involving
so
selected mediums.
yeah, the only reason we put selected in was we had to get a word that fitted prism,
This.
because a prism is something that it reflects light,
Yeah.
and hopefully, and that on the committee there was David Fontana, Guy Playfair, Mary Rose Barrington. We're supposed to have 7 people from psychical research, and
Right.
we're supposed to have 7 people from Stansted or in the spiritualists, but half
Right.
the spiritualists never turned up.
Right.
But Stephen Upton kept going. The one that Judith Seaman came sometimes. Vi Kipling always came. Oh, and somebody called Porter, and one or
Angela
two.
Porter, maybe? Was it a man or a woman?
Was a man. No, I can't
Oh,
remember.
no, it's not
He
Angela.
wasn't. He wasn't well known. And Paul Jacobs came, I think, once or twice. But it was very useful having the combination of the scientific mind and mediums, and we tried to
Yeah.
work together.
And they
And
work, a lot of them are working mediums, but they're all high ranking in the National
yeah,
Spiritualist National Union, aren't they? So that
well,
shows
they are now. Yeah, yeah.
the
Well,
involvement.
we used to meet at Stansted.
Right.
Stansted would we would pay our own fares, and Stansted would provide accommodation,
Oh,
and it
nice.
worked very well. And we had a lovely time down there as well. It was really good when Stansted was really good. And from that, it was actually my idea. Um, we devised experiments to work with mediums.
Yeah.
And it's far too complicated to explain, but we did experiments in triple blind, and we would gather an audience somewhere, but we wouldn't gather the audience. We'd get somebody else to take Edinburgh College of Parapsychology or something. They would advertise in the newspaper for people to sit to take part in experiments about the afterlife. So we had no idea who the people were. I would provide a medium because I knew more than Archie, and Archie would do some of the preparation in the room we're going to work. Archie would randomly number the seats. Totally, I wouldn't know what the random was. People that came in were given what was a shuffled pack of cards with numbers on the back. Say it was 1 to 40.
Yep.
And they go to 40. And as the people come in, they were given a seat number. If you're number 1, that's where you sit for the, and so on and so forth. So the seats were randomly numbered. The people whom we didn't know were randomly seated. I would be in another room with a medium, and we would always have a microphone that would present into the room so that they could hear what the medium was saying, but there was no two-way. The medium could not see who was sitting there. They couldn't hear any feedback. They couldn't see any body language, etc., etc. Now, I'm simplifying this because it takes a long time. Each session would take about 4 hours with a break in the middle. And what I would do was, well, Archie would have I didn't know, he would have a pre-sealed envelope with the numbers of seats that he wanted to receive a message. Now, we didn't know if this would work. I hadn't a clue if it would work or not. And say Archie had selected seat 24 to get the first message. The people didn't know they were the recipients. They just knew that somebody seated there was going to get a message from a medium, but they didn't even know they were recipients. So I would get a knock at the door, and I would say to the medium, whoever it was, a recipient has been selected next door to receive a message. Can you tell me what you're getting? And I would sit with my pad and record it. And I would say, now I want you to say one thing at a time. If you get a name and a description, just say, I'm hearing the name of William, and then something about William. William had a red beard, but one statement at a time, not a whole thing. And I would say, stop at 30. I don't want any more than 30. It becomes complicated after 30. It fits on the sheet. So they would make, they didn't all do 30, but they would each reading would be up to 30 statements, individual statements, right? And that would be number 1. And then we don't know anything. And then a wee while later, the second recipient, and so on. We would do this 6 times, which is a long time.
Yeah.
And it depends very much on the medium. So I'm writing away like Billy-O. And we had different experimental protocols as well. Sometimes we would throw in a dummy one that the medium didn't do at the time, but I would have taken it from other sittings, but it would sound like a mediumistic reading, but it wasn't the mediumship reading at that time. But I would say to the mediums, deliver this information in your own style, so the people wouldn't know any different.
Right.
So, and they all did it, and they all did it absolutely beautifully. So so you would do these 6 was a maximum. Sometimes for the 6th one, would let the medium come through and speak to the people straight to face. But sometimes the mediums did better blind than they did face to face. And so I've got all these sheets, and we're going back to what, 1980, 1997, something like that, when technology wasn't what it is now. So what would happen then? They would all go and get a cup of tea. I would go away to the nearest photocopier, wherever it was. It might be a shop, and I would photocopy the 6 statements, the number of times of the people that were in the audience. Then I would give the people in the audience one at a time, sheet number 1. Everybody would get sheet number 1. And I would say, then I would go in, doesn't matter now if I see the audience, and I would say, now, every single person in this room, you might be the recipient of this message. So everybody, every single person, if your father's name was William, number 1, you tick it. If it wasn't, leave it blank. If you had a red beard, and so on and so forth. I said, if you're not sure about the question and it's not absolutely correct, leave it blank. So there was no middle ground. It was either black or white. It was either correct or not correct. So we did this. It was a very long, prolonged thing. Of course, you've got to make sure they all sit in the same seats when they come back, which is also a thing you've got to do with people, right? So we did that. and it worked anyway. So what would happen at the very end of the night, we would split. No, I took all the sheets away because Archie knows his 8 numbers. I would take the whole lot away for that night. I would put it in my briefcase and forget about it for that day. So I've got all the information, I've got all the answers, and then the next day I would start and I would go through it and I would make a table of which seat numbers took which things. It takes ages to do that. And then from then on in, we could do statistics, and it worked. It absolutely worked. That it, of course, when I'm doing the statistics, I don't know the answer.
No.
So I'm just filling out the thing. And then Archie and I would get together somewhere and I would say, right, I've got my statistics, you got the seat numbers, and then he would show me the seat numbers and we couldn't believe it worked.
How it matched. The
It
seat
worked.
24
it absolutely worked.
A lot of correct answers.
About 70% accuracy,
Wow.
which is good.
Way above
because
chance, isn't it?
Chance is 33%.
Right.
If you're testing any medium anywhere, anytime, and they get 33% right, that's not mediumship. That's just chance.
That's interesting.
So we were absolutely, because there are a lot of mediums give out generalities and people accept it as evidence. It's not. It's anyway. But so, and what we did one time was at Stansted, you were talking about Tom Harrison the other night there, who was a lovely, lovely man. Lovely,
he
lovely
worked
man.
there, didn't he?
Eh?
He worked in Stansted, didn't he? He was the manager there at one time.
Tom Harrison. Well, maybe before I knew him, but I didn't really know him, but I'd met him somewhere along the line, and I hadn't even met his wife, Anne, at that time. So Archie and I were down, we're at a prison meeting, and we told them in Stansted we would do one experiment with them, which was actually a kid-on experiment. What I did was I made up a sheet of information, once again, taking it from other mediumistic information from other experiments. And I made up, well, fortunately, Stansted did have a photocopier, so we didn't know how many people were going to be in the room. And it so happened there was 48 people in the room. Now that it was in the big room, and there was an aisle down the middle, so we had 24 people on that side, 24 people on that side. We were on a platform of some kind, and well, the story was that Archie gave a short talk, and then I came in and said, we're going to do this experiment. So I said, somebody in this room is the recipient of the sheet I'm going to give to everybody, but I want you all to treat it as if it is for you. I said, now, it's like a school exam. If you are the recipient of this message, if you are the intended recipient of this message, there will be a big R at the top of your page. If you are not the recipient, it'll be NR. You are not the recipient, but fill the sheet in anyway, as if you are, if you can take any of the information. But I cheated. What I did was I gave this half of the room, everybody got an R. So, and I said, now it's like the school exam. Keep it away from your neighbour.
Don't show anybody.
You've all got a pen, and don't let them see, and fill in the sheet. And I said that to both sides. If you have an R, you're the recipient. If you're a non-recipient, it'll have NR. But what I did was I gave all of this half of the room the R's, and I gave this. But everybody behaved beautifully. I mean, I was watching them. Being a teacher, you can see every person in the room. If you're standing there, people think you can't see them, but you can. So, and Archie was there as well. So they dutifully did all of that, and they sat there. Did that. So, and then I gathered in all the papers. Recipients, and then I let Archie give a lecture, and I went away, and I just went through them all because I knew none of them. So I could see how many they'd taken. Say it was 30 statements. I could see how many of the 30 everybody had taken, and the people who thought they were not recipients, and believe it or not, the people who actually thought they were recipients, they had accepted 29, it was something like 29.5%. Not one person who thought they were a recipient took more than chance, because of course it was a false set of papers.
Right.
And bizarre, the people who thought they were non-recipients, they accepted 30%. So the people who thought they weren't recipients, I mean, that's nothing mathematically.
Yeah.
So then I was able to come back later and the next day and tell them, and they all laughed and laughed. I said, you all passed the test. If anyone's going to cheat, it'll be people at Stansted. So that just showed when the medium was not at work in the experiments, it was chance whether you thought. And to me, that was very, very important. That was an important point that they did very well. I gave them a clap for that.
Well, this is all high mathematics, isn't it? About chance, etc.
Do you know?
And you're in the right place to know all about that.
But do you know we did it all over Scotland, England. I don't think we ever got to Wales. Different places, people, and it's very mathematical. You would die reading it because you wouldn't understand it.
Yeah.
And it produced 3 published papers in the Journal of the Society for Psychical Research.
Wow.
And to this day, Chris Rowe actually often cites it as a good experiment.
It's a ground rules,
Absolutely. But I tell you, nobody else is going to do it. It's hard work.
It is. You've answered a couple of things there. I often wondered how the blackboard duster found its way to my head when I thought, well, the teacher's not looking. No, there's a couple of things you said. You described blind
reading. See, the skeptic,
and also you the way you did it took away the what they skeptics say about cold reading. You avoided that completely, didn't you?
That's what they call it, the Barnum effect.
Yeah.
That you get body language and feedback, and you do to a certain extent.
But if you're in a room that you're not seeing the person you're talking to,
absolutely,
you can't get that feedback.
Absolutely,
so that was interesting.
Now that's the boring. That's the boring side of all of this, and in as scientific a manner as possible. Now,
can I just say one point on before we go on from there? When we worked in the Edinburgh College of Parapsychology, I correct that, when Margaret, my wife, worked in the Edinburgh College, I sat around in the cafe most of the day. But we were talking to lots of the mediums that they had there regular, and they described doing exactly what you've just said, except that they didn't describe your part of it. They did it themselves. You inspired them to do it blind from one room.
Good. Well, I didn't know that. That was
the mediums themselves were quite amazed that they could give a reading to somebody in the other room.
Well, there was nobody more surprised than Archie and I. We did not know if this was going to work, and every time we did it and it worked, we were like children going, "Yay, woo, woo!" But you've got to do it again and again and again all over the country, and of course, I'm not going to mention any names, but there were some mediums, of course, who were getting as high as 90%, and some mediums that were getting, like 60%. But the point is, it worked, and it depends very much on the energy in the room. I didn't, that's why, and Zoom works extremely well. I think the Zoom is fantastic for that. I mean, they know where they're going. The people, the consciousness are up above.
We could talk about going direct or putting it out there, but we could leave that.
We will not do that. No, don't talk about.
Don't do that one.
No, don't do that. No,
that blackboard chalkboard will be flying my way again.
No.
Something else behind it. So you started to say then, so that wasn't even the most exciting.
No, well, the exciting thing. Well, I don't know your history. We've all got a different, but the exciting thing about that is once you start all of that, it's as if I'll call it the universe. It's as if the universe puts things in front of you. Nothing I've done I've ever looked for. I did not envisage this at all. I didn't even envisage writing books. We'll come to that in a minute.
Yeah.
But things are put in your wake. There was a whole decade when it was one thing after another were brought to my attention that I had to investigate. For example, reincarnation cases, the apparitions, different things, which are in detail in, well, most books. I can't remember what's in what particular book, and I
Yeah.
can't even remember what came first. But when something happens, they're triggered to put that in your wake. Now, the one thing I will do, I don't take any BS. I do things honestly. There's no point in being dishonest. And the last bastion of the skeptic is to say, oh, well, how do we know they did that? Well, I would go through them like a dose of salts. I mean, that's the kind of scientific side, and that's looking at it just mediumship alone. But as I say, things come into your wake, and I investigated lots and lots of different things, and I think, well, one of the, I suppose you would say, more exciting ones and credible ones
Right.
was, which is in the first book. I call it Phantom Pilot meets Phantom Pilot. You'll know why in a minute. And it was this chap that actually got in touch with Archie Roy at the university. A lot of our contacts came through Glasgow University.
Is
And
that what you mean by spontaneous, when somebody
yes,
gets in touch with yourselves? So that would be the spontaneity of it.
yeah, well, it's a spontaneous case. Nobody's
Right.
looking for it. You're not sitting in
Yeah.
you're not sitting in a circle looking for an apparition. It's
Okay.
something happens that you don't expect. Anyway, this Robert Hambleton Jones, he was English. He was in the late 1960s, I think it was. He was a pilot who piloted a Phantom jet. He worked off the Ark Royal, and he was actually a pilot for the Navy. Don't ask me, but he was a pilot for the Navy, and they worked from the Ark Royal. And he was one of the ones who was a Phantom jet, a pilot for wars and things like that. He was very good at bombing and targeting and things like that. He was so good that he was sent to Miramar in America to train the Americans
Wow.
in target practice, because
On their plane. Yeah.
Americans weren't very good at it. That was the Phantom jets are still going, but they've moved on. And he was a very straightforward, very almost artistic, in what he does. He was a black and white kind of person, and well, I've seen his logbook. His logbook's amazing. So he was absolutely genuine, credible, a trained witness, an eyewitness to what he's doing,
Right.
focused, not somebody with imagination. And he didn't believe in this after death lark. He thought it was a lot of, you know what, hoo-ha, nonsense, no such thing as God, all that sort of thing, very black and white. And what had happened was, okay, his phantom days were over. Then when he injured his back, having to be ejected, but he flew for Loganair for a while. And obviously he met a lot of other pilots in Loganair. And then after that, he decided him and someone else were going to possibly buy an old Russian plane or something and use it for commercial purposes. So he'd been somewhere in Russia. This is before the latest Carry On, of course, looking at old aeroplanes to see if they're going to buy one or not. So it's important. He'd come from Russia, he'd come through Cambridge, and he came from Cambridge to Glasgow. And he'd been away on business, so he wasn't drinking or anything like that. I'm not saying he didn't like a drink, but he wasn't drinking at that time. So he was coming into Glasgow airport, and he was expected to be met by a friend of his, but he was dubious about this friend that wouldn't turn up. So he got off. It was June, and I want to say June the 6th. The date doesn't matter. I know it was June. I know it was very hot, and I know it was a Wednesday, from memory. And I'll tell you why I remember in a minute, except the date. So this was before the date that the terrorists drove their car into Glasgow Airport and set it on fire. Remember?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
So it was a much more open concourse. There was two sets of sliding doors over here and two sets over there. Now it's, you can't get in practically. But anyway, it's called Bob. Right. So Bob, he came off the plane from Cambridge, and he's standing right in the middle of the concourse, looking at his watch and saying, I don't think that bee's going to turn up for me. So he put down his case, looked at his watch, and it was 2:45, 2:45 in the afternoon. So he was looking at that when suddenly he looked up and he saw coming through the faraway doors someone waving at him and coming towards him. And he recognized it as one of the Loganair pilots, a much younger chap. He was only 36. And the first thing he saw him coming was he thought, he's lost a hell of a lot of weight. That was the first thing he noticed. See, he wasn't wearing a uniform, he was just wearing civvies. And the person who had big space in his teeth and very large glasses came up to him, and the only thing he thought was odd was he didn't put his hand forward to shake hands. But you know, and he was called Bob too, which is unfortunate. So the other man, he came up and he went, "Hi, Bob," and they had a conversation. "How are you, you old bugger? How are you? You behaving yourself?" Typical banter, between pilots. And then the other man said, "I'll need to go now. My plane is just about to leave." So I thought that was nice and what have you. So he picked up his bag again. My Bob picked up his bag, looked over to the checkout, but he couldn't see any sign of the other chap. He was gone. Never thought a thing about it. Then the next morning, he went to a local hostelry for a drink where pilots drink. And he was sitting there having a pint or whatever he was having. And a man came up and threw down the Scotsman paper in front of him. And there was a picture of the man he'd met in the airport the day before. And above the picture, it was quite a big picture, I've still got it somewhere, was the word obituary. The obituary of Robert, I'm trying to remember it, McLeod. Robert, wow. And I've got a shiver as I'm saying that. Somebody's here. Robert McLeod obituary, and a picture of the guy, big space between his teeth, the glasses, and a young man, 36, 37 years of age. And my Bob went, "What? I'm cleaning up the words here. What rubbish is this?" He said, "That's absolute nonsense. That's ridiculous. Loganair printed that. That's absolutely ridiculous." And he was on his high horse. He was absolutely livid and convinced everybody that was a load of rubbish. So much so that he phoned up Loganair, I think, and he found out it was correct. He had died 3 days earlier, or 2 days, in an Edinburgh hospital.
Wow.
And as I say, and he couldn't understand this at all. So they came to us. Archie Roy was going to Italy to a conference on astronomy, so I took up the rein. Yeah. So I phoned to Glasgow Airport and asked to speak to head of security, and we thought we might get the video cam.
Right.
But by the time they got to us, it was about a week later. Anyway, long story short, I went with my Bob, it was a stranger at that time. We went up to Glasgow Airport. We went to head of security, I couldn't remember his name. Well, I did remember it. I've forgotten it now. Mike Trevino, that was his name. And we got into the head of security and we told the story, and he didn't laugh. You see, he knew Bob as a pilot. He would know him. So that would be the credibility getting into the airport. He knew he was a genuine pilot.
Yeah.
So we got into this room and Bob told the story and the time and everything. So the chief of security, he went to a cupboard and he took out a leaflet and he threw it in front of me and he said, check that Wednesday, the times and the dates of the plane leaving. Now, the one who died lived in Stornoway at the north of Scotland. And at 3 o'clock on that day, when he said, "I'll need to go, my plane is just leaving," there was a plane leaving for Stornoway at 3 o'clock on the Wednesday, and he had met him at 1:45. Remember there were pilots. Yeah. Then he looked up the manifest thing and he found there was a coffin on that plane that had come from Edinburgh.
Wow.
And Bob died in an Edinburgh hospital. Wow. So if you coffin, plane, I'm shivered. I'm frozen down the back here, by the way.
Must have been him, yeah.
Coffin, plane, and on there. Now, Bob still couldn't believe it. It didn't do him any good. So the next day or the day after, I met Bob again in the pub, and he phoned. He knew the other Bob's father. So in Stornoway, but he knew there were wee free churchy people. So he watched what he was saying, and he phoned up Norman and he said, I've just heard about Bob. He said it was not the way he spoke. I've just heard about Robert. He said that, what happened. And I was listening. It was the phone, you could hear, the two. And he said, yes, it was quite dreadful. He said he was in hospital for 3 months, and in that time he lost 3 stone.
Wow.
Now, what was the first thing my Bob said?
Yeah, how
He'd
slim he
lost
was.
he'd
Yeah.
lost a hell of a lot of weight. Now, he said that long before we knew the guy had lost 3 stone, and he wasn't a big guy to start with.
Yeah.
Anyway, it never did my Bob any good. He said, he used to say, I bloody well know who I saw that day, but I still don't believe it.
Yeah,
And
funny you should say that, because I had a friend and he concluded, after having a fabulous reading with Margaret, he came back to the office one day and he said, oh, I just met the twins up in the village,
uh-huh.
two particular brothers.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody said to him, well, you couldn't have, because one of the twins, I don't know any of the details, but one of the twins died a week ago.
Mm-hmm.
But even having seen
Yep.
exactly as you described, the
Yep.
phantom pilot seeing a phantom,
Mm-hmm.
this man saw the twins. He knew he'd saw both the
Mm-hmm.
twins.
Mm-hmm.
I think he might have had a conversation, but only maybe the one did the speaking. I can't remember, but he definitely saw the two of them,
Mm-hmm.
and one of them was over the other side at that point, and that still didn't convince a friend of mine.
No, I had another one,
Surviving.
a much lesser case. This woman contacted me, and there's a particular small bridge goes over in Bon Hill. It's just a walkway bridge, and every Thursday this woman would be rushing in one direction at the side of the bridge, going to pick up a child, and she'd meet this old couple, Rosie and Jim, on the other side, and they would wave to each other, say hello, blah blah blah. And every Thursday this happened, until one day that she was crossing the bridge and she saw Jim on his own, but she didn't have time to say, where's Rosie? And then the next time she met Rosie on her own. So she said to Rosie, oh, she said, she said, oh, how are you? Are you all right? She said, yeah, I was speaking to Jim saw Jim on his own last week. She said, you couldn't have. Jim died 8 days ago. So she's seen the man on his own after he died.
Yeah.
She couldn't understand. But this is a spontaneous case. This
Yeah.
is something you don't expect.
Yeah.
And that is what spontaneous cases are. Yeah.
Margaret's father appeared on the bottom of his drive. I think I've got it in one of the videos. And one of the neighbours got herself a Chinese takeaway and walked past him on the bottom of the drive. And he was holding the little dog, because he used to take the dog across the road to rough grass every night. Good night, Mr. Pritchard. I don't know if he answered. But anyway, the other neighbour then said to her a day or two later, oh, I saw Mr. Pritchard the other night. When was this? Oh, no, I got it wrong. That was sad news about Mr. Pritchard. What? Well, he died. Oh, I only saw him Wednesday night. And she knew what night it was because of the takeaway. Well, you couldn't have. He died on the Monday.
That's right. That's
But the
right.
little dog died 6 months previously.
Oh, the dog will be with him, of course. Yeah. The animals are always there.
Yeah, when you think, seeing is believing, it's not, is it? Because a lot of the people.
Well, it is believing, because that person, the observer could perceive that person.
Yeah.
Not everybody could, but the person was there to be seen.
Well, why didn't my friend then accept life beyond physical death, having seen?
Because they can't. I can't answer that question.
No, my dad is the same. Should I tell you my dad's story as quick as I can?
Yeah, sure.
My mother died Alzheimer's, and when you say about Archie Roy, when she came back, she hadn't communicated at all for a month, and she was non-communicative, badly communicative for a long period. But within the hour of her crossing over, she's in the room upstairs talking totally cogently with Margaret, mediumistically. But anyway, a year and 1 month later, my dad died. I didn't hear from him for 2 months. But during that year, when he was on his own, he woke up one morning and he knew that he was in bed with my mother. because he could feel her, etc.
Mhm.
And she woke him up and she said, "Come on, Keith, wake up." And the cleaner was coming at 9:30, and if this was 9 a.m. and he hadn't woken up, he hadn't got out of bed for the cleaner. Well, that turned out to be her birthday.
Ah.
And there was another day. We were parked outside. He knew we were there because it was all arranged. We'd taken him out. And eventually he comes running up the drive. It's only a short drive.
Mhm.
"What's the matter, Dad?" "Oh, it's your bloody mother." "What about her?" "She's shouting at me again." We're coming down the stair lift and she's shouting at him, "Hurry up, Keith, they're
Mhm.
waiting for you."
Mhm.
So he goes and dies. And even at the point of him dying, and he'd been in hospital about 6 weeks with a leaking aorta and the operation,
Mhm.
in and out of morphine, etc.
Yeah. Yeah.
He was saying, "See that door there?" And there was
Mhm.
just a blank wall.
Mhm.
They open the door and they wave to me and they say, "No, you can't come yet.
Yep.
You can't
That's
use it."
absolutely typical.
But
Yeah.
he did not believe, even with 20 years of exposure to medium, maybe longer, 20, nearly 30 years of exposure to mediumship, he did not believe that we survived physical death.
Well, people say to me quite often, I've done a lot of interviews, all over the world, etc., and people say to me, "You believe in these? What makes you believe?" I say, "Can I just stop you there?" I say, "I don't have to believe in anything. I go where the evidence leads, and the evidence is such that I'm convinced of survival." And I also think you might disagree that survival is different for every person that passes over. There are common factors. You will everybody consciousness survives, but your experience when you go is different. Once again, there are common factors. You might have a tunnel of light, you might not, but you'll be greeted by something loving, and then you'll progress further on. What goes on in between is totally different for a lot of people.
Yeah. And when we talk about seeing is believing, there's a lot of people who've seen mediums who are physical mediums, and they produce the ectoplasm, and the
Mhm.
spirit person walks into the ectoplasm and is seen
Yeah,
out,
like Gordon Higgins.
out
So there's
maybe.
no
So
question of that. That's real.
yeah, not everybody's going to be able to get that evidence, are they? But you've witnessed. Have you witnessed it yourself? I know
I
you've
haven't. I
spoken
have.
with
I
people.
have not witnessed Gordon. I've witnessed people trying to do it.
Yeah,
I I've felt the cold in the room. You always get that energy.
yeah,
They seem to take the heat out the room when they do it, and there's nothing mega convincing in that line for me. But I've spoken to so many people and had so much witness testimony
yeah,
that I accept that these things. But there's also a lot of kidology on it as well, and there's also a lot of imagination in it. People would say in transfiguration, "Oh, look, you can see a beard, you can see this." Now, it just might be that I am not able to see these things.
yeah,
And unless everybody can see the same thing, I'm not interested, to be honest with you.
yeah. My problem with transfiguration is I'm with you on, if you've got somebody with a rugged face and they cover it with a scarf and they're in black,
Mm,
put a red light on them, well, that rugged
yeah,
face can make all kinds of
yeah, yeah,
distortions. I've never been convinced, even sitting very close to somebody we had here who had a rugged face.
yeah. I
And
know, I
another
know.
one who was quite a famous exponent of transfiguration, supposedly the ectoplasmic mask type of transfiguration.
Mm-hmm,
People at the front, they said they saw their relatives, but maybe
mm-hmm.
they were also um, helping out the medium to say, "Yeah, I can see somebody," because
Yeah,
we were sitting further back and we couldn't see any.
no, no,
But
I know.
I have sat opposite Margaret and spontaneously,
Mm-hmm.
and I can't remember the circumstances, but I think it was in the middle of the day. There's good light. I'm sure there was good light. There wasn't anything unusual about the circumstances. She's just sitting there. And then straight away, I had Robert E. Lee, the Confederate general.
Mm-hmm.
He appeared. Now, I've been watching history of the American Civil War, so there was
Mm-hmm.
no question in my mind. I was looking at Robert E. Lee.
Mm-hmm.
And then that disappeared. And a Native American Indian appeared.
Yeah,
Now, I couldn't tell you if that was Sitting Bull. It might have been, but I couldn't really tell you. But he was definitely Native American. That was unequivocal. And the third person was George Armstrong Custer.
Oh,
At that point, I must have started speaking
oh.
because then he spoke, and I don't know if it was his accent, but it was an American,
Mm-hmm.
what you'd imagine as a drawl, American accent.
Mm-hmm.
So I asked him, what kind of hair did you have when you were alive? Because quite frankly, it's quite difficult to think of something to ask
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
on the spur of the moment. And straight away, I heard, oh, God damn it, boy, I made all this effort to come and speak with you, and all you can ask is what color hair I've got. Oh, I took the point. So I said to him, oh, okay, I will take your point. What can you describe the circumstances that led to you being at the front in your first battle of the American Civil War? And he said, oh, without any delay or hesitation, he said, oh, you're talking about the mix-up over the names. Now, I can't imagine Margaret knowing who this person was, let alone the detailed history.
Mm-hmm.
But it turned out, watching the history program, there were two George Armstrong Custers at West Point.
Ah.
One was at the bottom of the class, one was at the top. The orders got mixed up.
Right.
One who was at the top of the class ended up in the outback of the Midwest, guarding a railway junction.
Mm-hmm.
The one who was at the bottom of the class was sent to the front, and it turned out to be, the general eventually, but he was low rank then, and he saw a bridge, and he realized if we don't hold the bridge, then the Union Army can't escape, and the Confederate Army would cross the bridge, and that would be the end of the war, right at the start of the war,
Right.
with the Union failing.
Okay.
And he held the bridge, and so that got him the promotion.
There
Now,
you go.
Margaret couldn't have known about that.
No.
But
No.
I'm mediumistic. I am a medium. I can do the demonstrations. Whether I'm any good at it or not, I don't know. but did I see what I saw mediumistically? If
Yeah.
there was a second person in the room, would they have seen what I saw?
Not necessarily. No, I wouldn't think so. I think
I don't think it was ectoplasm then, was it? Or it was more your photoplasm or whatever.
Does it matter which way you
No.
saw it? It doesn't matter.
There was another time I was in a Brahma Kumaris meditation group.
Oh yeah.
Only once or twice.
I remember them, yeah.
Yeah. Well, they do it with their eyes open. So I'm seeing a picture of the founder of Brahma Kumaris on the wall. And
Was that the woman?
no, it was a man. They have women now.
Was the woman, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, they are the leaders now. But on this woman, who was a Welsh woman, I think, on her face, all of a sudden, was his face. But he was animated.
Of course.
I said to the young man next to me, God, look at that. What? Can't you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Do you see what I'm seeing? He didn't see what I was seeing.
No, I suppose it's a matter of perception. Yeah. I know, it's strange. I can't answer. That I can't answer. And just a funny story. Archie Roy he was a quietly funny man as well. He had a very droll sense of humor. And we're talking about apparitions while we're talking about that. And it was before I knew Archie, actually, or just when I knew him at first. He was invited to the Earl of Haddington's house. It's more of a castle than a house, to stay the night and talk about paranormal stuff. So that was fine. They had a lovely night, nice meal and a drink. And Archie was shown to this lovely old-fashioned room with a fancy old-fashioned four-poster bed, lovely, all his orders. And in the morning, Archie was wakened up by a maid standing over him with a kind of mop cap. And he opened up his eyes and he looked and he thought, oh, someone's coming to bring me a cup of tea. And as he looked at her, she looked down and smiled at him and then disappeared. She just went completely altogether.
Wow.
And Archie had no imagination for that. So he just thought, okay. So he went down to breakfast, obviously. And it was Lord Haddington and his wife. I don't know them, John Haddington, actually. So they were sitting there. And the wife said, and how did you sleep, Archie? He said, well, I slept very well. He said, a strange thing happened in the morning. And she said, they laughed. Oh, excuse me. They laughed. And she said, you got off very lucky. She said, the last man that stayed in this room at night, he took his false teeth out at night and put them in the glass beside the bed. And when he wakened up in the morning, the false teeth were gone and he never got them back. He was sitting at breakfast mumbling. So she said, you got off very lucky. So a mischief is made. And if we thought about it, it was the old-fashioned mop cap, with the frills round it. So she's around, yeah, playing tricks. So I think we should call it a day if that's okay.
Fascinating.
And it was lovely to talk to you.
Lovely to talk with you, Tricia.
Okay, so shall we say bye-bye? Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Yeah.